Would you like to design your very own persistent data storage using Verse inside of UEFN? Well, you're in the right place because I will teach you everything you need to know in this tutorial video. The code that I write will be available for completely free inside of my Discord server by following the very first link in the description. Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know on how to design your very own persistent data system. It's one of the most important things that you can learn about when designing a game, especially just because it has so many use cases. For example, you can design custom currency, you can design secret codes, so like a one-time code, for example. You can also use it to do like steps in a tutorial of like, has the player done this step? Anything that you want to track across multiple sessions, you can do with persistence. Okay, so with all that out of the way, the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you don't have the Verse Explorer open, go up here and do Verse, and then click this Verse Explorer button. Once you've got the Verse Explorer open, go ahead and right-click the content folder and click Create New Verse File. Okay, so you want to make sure you have a Verse device selected, not any of these other ones, and we are going to name this Game Manager, just like that, and we are going to click create. There's actually one more that we need to create as well, and this is the player data, and you want to make sure that this is empty because this is not going to be a creative device. This is going to be a regular class, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. Alright, so once you've got your Verse scripts created, go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do with all of my Verse scripts is I like to delete some of this code here that is left for us by Epic Games. And you can go ahead and wrap this function here with some parentheses. It will prevent it from getting angry at us, and it just serves as like a temporary thing. I also like to include a bunch of modules here. I will leave this in the description, so if you want to go ahead and copy this in there. We won't use most of these, to be honest with you. I don't even think we need to import any special ones, but it's good to have. And as you continue to build out the script, it's annoying to see the squiggly line and be like, oh man, I need this module. So then you go back up and you do it. It is technically unnecessary, but it is, like I said, it's just a time saver to just get it out of the way. As far as I know, this is basically every module that you would need to import. It doesn't include scene graph or anything like that, but for 90% of the time when you're coding, this is everything you're going to need. And it's good practice to implement it into your project in the very beginning instead of having to start and stop and go to the top. Alright, so if you're following along so far, the first thing that we're going to want to do is on line 24. This is where we're going to define a few variables. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do @editable, and we're going to have a button device just like this. And below that, we are also going to have an array of player spawners, and that is marked with the square brackets right here. So it's an array of player spawner device. And then we're also going to be including an integer called version. And there's a lot of misconception with the version in particular, so I will be going over that once we start designing the player data class. But it's important that you know that this is used very similar to how UEFN has revision control. In a nutshell, what you can do with this is if you want to completely wipe everybody's data, let's say, for example, you have a new season or a big massive update that comes out and you want everybody to have like 0 data again, all you have to do is change this integer to like 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, and then it'll clear everything for you. So now what you can do is go ahead and remove the parentheses. We are going to subscribe to all of these spawned events for each player spawner individually. So to do that, we're going to do for player spawner and then a colon, player spawners, and then another colon. And what this is doing is this is a for loop, and this basically just loops through for all of the player spawners. We are calling one player spawner, and inside of that for loop we are going to do player spawner dot spawned event dot subscribe, and then we're going to do this as spawned event just like that. After that, we're going to subscribe to the button, so make sure you're outside of the for loop and do button dot interacted with event dot subscribe. And inside of there, we're going to do button pressed event, just like that. Both of those have squigglies because we haven't actually defined the function. So the first thing we're going to do is spawned event, and that takes an agent And for right now, we're just going to use the parentheses again to mark it as like a to-do almost. And below that, we're going to do button pressed event, and that is going to be interacting agent, because we want to be specific here. It's always good. Do not be afraid to have more code as long as the code is readable. When I first started coding, a really big thing for me is that I was trying to have like B equals button or IA for, I wouldn't even do IA, I would just do A for agent. And I think that's a really common misconception with intermediate coders and advanced coders, is that it's okay to have more lines of code as long as it's readable. That is the number one most important thing, is so that if future you, or if you're on a team and you want to work with somebody, it's really hard to look at a piece of code, and if variables are named weird or things like, I'm not going to put any comments in this because I'm verbally explaining it, but I always put comments in all of my code as much as I can without it getting cluttered, because it just kind of goes into diminishing returns at that point. But anyway, the interacting agent will also be type agent, and we're going to mark that with the parentheses as well. So we actually have a third function that we need to include as well, and this is going to be a init player, and this is going to be player ref, and this is going to be of type player with a suspense, just like that. And the reason why I break it out into a separate function like this is for two reasons. The first thing is when an agent spawns and a player spawner reads that, it returns an agent. And when we're dealing with player data, and specifically player data maps, we will be using the type player, not the type agent. And so the first thing that we want to do is if player ref equals, and then this is a cast function right here with these square brackets, we are going to do player ref, and we're going to do init player, and we are going to pass the player ref into the initialization. There's an error here because it is a suspends function, so I'm going to do spawn just like that. And the second reason why I use the init player function instead of doing it directly in the spawn is because of the suspends effect. As you continue to build out a bigger and bigger game, you're naturally going to do more things when a player joins. It could start small with like, you set their health, or you grab their data, very short things like that. But something that I didn't find out about until way later in my developing journey is that if a function takes longer than a single tick, then you will get a verse error, and it says like a timeout error or something along those lines. That's because there's too much logic happening inside of a synchronous function. But when you add the suspends effect, it becomes asynchronous, and it is no longer required to fit within a single verse tick, which again, don't quote me on this, I believe is 1 millisecond, I think, somewhere around there. It's like a fraction of amount of time. So it's super important, and it also future proofs you as you continue to build out your game so that you never run into verse errors. Also, something you might have noticed is I sound kind of nasally, so I apologize about that. I am still recovering from a sickness. I've been super under the weather the past few days, and so I wanted to get this video out for you guys. Ignore the nasally voice. Overall, I feel all right. And yeah, so this is basically where we're at with the game manager. We are going to have to switch gears a little bit and start working on the player data, because this is everything that we need so far to access the player data. You can write the player data before this, and in fact, I have a template that is available for completely free in the Discord, no catch or anything like that, that I will provide to you guys. So you can literally just paste it into any of your projects and save it, keep it, and I really encourage you to get familiar with how it's set up and how you can easily apply it to any of your projects. So with that being said, let's go ahead and click on player data. Once again, I am going to be pasting in the modules from before. So the first thing we need to do is define the player data map, and basically what this is very similar to an array, except there's a key and a value. So first off, we want to do player data map, and this is going to be public, and it's going to be of type weak map, and it's going to be player data, and this is going to just be an empty map. And we haven't defined the player data yet, but basically what's happening here is the player is the key and the player data is the value, and together they form a pair and they are like linked together. So anytime we pass in the player, in this case when they spawn in, it takes the agent from the spawner, converts it into a player, and then we use that player to specifically pull a particular array of player data classes for that player specifically. Below that, we're going to add the player data class, and this is also going to be public, and this is going to be of type class, final, and persistable, just like that. Also, by the way, if you see this like autofill thing, it's a tool called Copilot. It is super useful. I think it's like 20 or 30 bucks a month, and it gets smarter as you code per project. By the way, that was like a common misconception. It's not this like super intelligence or whatever, but it will read your code and then it'll analyze the patterns and it'll autofill based on what you have. And so that's what this is over here, build with agent. I'm not shilling it or anything, not hashtag not sponsored. They'll, you know, Copilot, let me know. But yeah, anyway, so this basically is a class that is used to define specific values for the player. And let me write out a couple things for you, and then I'll kind of explain on like what kind of things you can do with this. So the first thing is the version, and this is going to be of type int, and this will be 0. We also have eliminations like this. It'll be an integer as well. We have money, which honestly, my personal opinion, I think using a float is way better than using an integer, because if you are trying to award things like XP, you know, XP and money go hand in hand. So if you have a handler function, for example, where you want to, you know, process some form of float, all of your currencies, cash, gems, whatever you want it to be, highly recommend them being a float. We also have last active, and that is a float as well, and total playtime, which is a float as well. So I'm not really going to be touching on these two in particular, but if you want me to make a dedicated video about tracking the last time that they were active, or, you know, setting up some kind of like cross-section playtime tracking or cross-section rewards, stuff like that, definitely let me know down in the comments. I will happily make a video on that. But yeah, just let me know what kind of content you guys want to see. Also, on that topic, guys, hey, just saying, you could always subscribe. You could subscribe as well while you're at it. I mean, it's free. You can always take it back. You can unsubscribe at any time. You will not hurt my feelings. I appreciate that. Below that, we are going to add something called a constructor, and this is going to be called make player profile data, just like that. And it's going to have a public and a constructor, just like that. And the source is src. And this is a player data, just like that. It takes in some existing data, and then it also transacts, and it will return a player data. And then in here, we are going to basically just copy whatever is inside of the player data and put src dot in front of it. So for example, version is equal to src dot version, and eliminations is equal to src dot eliminations, and money is src money, last active src last active, and total playtime is src total playtime. So again, I'm not going to go over and show you how to set up each one of these. They all follow the same exact method, and you can store any kind of primitive type. So for example, you can store floats, integers, booleans, logic. You can also store maps and arrays, just as long as the constructor function matches the source, in this case player data. As long as those two match, then you should be good to go, and you can pass it directly in. So for example, if you are storing an array of IDs, which is usually what I do if I have a complex class, I'll put an ID inside of it, and then I'll store a map of those IDs instead. And basically what you do is you just fetch the ID from the array, and if they buy an item, for example, you have an item definition, like a custom item definition, you just add the ID to the array, and then you pass that new array into the constructor. After that, we need to write out a new function called set player data, and this is going to be public, and it will take in a player reference, so player ref of type player, and then it'll also take in the updated data, and this will be player data, and this is going to be a failable function, so it's going to be decides and transacts. There we go. And this will return a optional void. And the reason for this is because I know that typically when you have a decides and a transacts effect on a function, it will automatically return false if it fails. But for whatever reason, there have been multiple instances where a function like this should fail and it doesn't, or it should pass and it doesn't. And so just as a like two-factor authentication method, I always put a optional result. So then what we do is var result is a question mark void, or an optional void, and that is set to false by default. And then we do if player data equals get player data, player reference with a question mark on the end. And then this is the key here, fits in player map, and we pass in the updated data just like that. If we do if dot set player data map, and then we pass in the player reference equals updated data, and then set result equals option void, just like that. And finally, make sure you're outside of the if statement. You just put result. Make sure this is lowercase, and we are missing get player data. Don't worry about that just yet. But the key here is making sure that it fits inside of player map. And by technicality, from my experience, you will literally never run into this problem, but it's just another way to future-proof yourself so that you're not sitting there scratching your head or anything like that, because I've done that before. It's so frustrating. I guarantee you that 99% of the time you'll be fine. But what this is doing is, if for whatever reason your player data class is too big, and you can read the documentation on it if you'd like, but there is like a super big limit. If by some reason it is too big for that, it will fail and it won't try to update it. It will just keep the data where it's at. And so if this does fail, for example, you could even throw in like an error print, you know, just so that it's like error, or like, you know, prints out something for you as the developer to know that it's like you've reached the point where it's too big. Below that, we are going to write out the get player data function, and it's going to be public, is going to have a player reference, and this is going to be type player, and this is also going to be a failable function. It's going to have decides and transacts with another optional player data, just like that. And following a very similar structure to the set player data function, we're going to have a variable at the top called results data, and this is optional player data equals false. So the first step in retrieving the player data is first making sure that the player is active. So we're going to do if player ref dot is active. That just basically means, is the player alive? And basically what this means is we're just double checking to make sure that the player actually exists. If you try to get or set something inside of a weak map, which is what we are dealing with here, and the player does not exist inside of the game, it will crash the entire server. So it's super critical that you include this, because again, this is just another way to cement and basically nuclear proof this from ever going wrong. Below that, we are going to do existing data is equal to player data map, and we're going to pass in the player ref just like that. And we're going to do set result data is equal to option existing data. If the player doesn't already have some existing data, we are going to do else if, and we're going to define some new data, which is just a fresh instance of the player data class. So new data is equal to player data with the curly brackets right here. By the way, another tip, it took me a really long time to understand this. This literally is the place to define the class. So don't do this. This is just for example. You could put inside of here version is equal to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And same thing, you could do money is equal to 100. You know, any of these values work. It's yelling at me right now because I haven't actually returned. So here, let me just put this at the bottom, false Whenever you see the curly brackets inside of here, this is where you define the default values for a particular class. Below that, we're going to do set player data map, and we want to pass in the player reference equal to the new data. No matter the result of the initial if statements, then we're going to set the result data equal to option new data. And then finally, below that, we are going to return the result data. All right, so the final component of this player data is we need to validate it. If you remember, I mentioned the versions. Now I'm going to show you exactly how that works and kind of what the back end of that looks like. And it's way simpler than you think. So we're going to do validate player data, and this is going to be public, and this is going to take in a player reference of type player, and it's also going to take in the current version, and this is going to be an integer, and it will do nothing, so it'll return void. And all we have to do here is draw a very simple comparison between the player data's version and the current version. So what we do is we do if player data is get player data, and remember we pass in the player reference, and also inside of that same if statement, if the player data dot version is less than the current version. Below that, we want to do new player data, and this is going to be of type player data, and it'll be equal to player data, and inside of the curly brackets, we're going to do version is equal to the current version. So this essentially clears out every other value in the player class, but it updates the player version to the current version that you have in the game manager. Finally, we need to do if set player data, and then we pass in the player reference and the new player data. All right, so once you've got all four of these functions done, we can go ahead and go back to the game manager where we can finish up, get this thing tested and working. All right, so go ahead and remove the parentheses inside of the init player function. And the first thing we need to do is check to see if they have any existing data. So we're going to do if player data is equal to get player data, and we want to pass in that player reference just like this. Below that, if they do have existing data, we need to validate that it is the current version. So validate player data, and we're going to pass in the player reference and the version. Even though the get player function does automatically create a new instance of the player, so it will usually never fail. I just like to, call me crazy, call me like a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but Epic is constantly, and I mean constantly, breaking stuff. If there's any reason why this doesn't work, I just like to include, it's like 2 lines of code. I just do new player data is player data, and that's just like a fresh instance. And again, make sure version is equal to version. There we go. And then we do if set player data, and we pass in the player reference and the new player data. So like I said, it's kind of redundant, but honestly, redundancy is sometimes needed, and it's only 2 lines of code. It is setting it twice, or like creating it twice. It'll override it. It's not going to have like 2 duplicates or anything like that. And if you have a good understanding of verse and you're only here just to understand the persistence part, that's totally okay. The very last thing that I want to do is walk you through how to correctly update the player data and how to make sure that it gets assigned correctly and stored correctly as well. So it's very simple. It's only 3 or 4 lines of code. It really just depends on what values you're updating, which could be, you know, a bunch all at once, but you're really only going to be updating 1 at a time, 2 at a time maybe. But the first thing you want to do is go ahead and remove the parentheses from the button pressed event. We then want to do player ref, and we are going to do player interacting agent just like that. And you can put this anywhere in your code, but you need to make sure that you pass a player in specifically. We then want to do if player data is get player data, player reference with a question mark just like that. Below that, we do updated player data, and that is equal to player data, just like that. This is the part where you actually update the value. So we do money in this case, which is the value I'm going to be updating, and we do player data dot money plus whatever value this is going to be. So I'm just hard coding 100 right now because this is just an example and I want to show you the method behind it. But this could be a variable somewhere in your code. Let's say you kill a zombie and you have like a rebirth multiplier and a money multiplier and a zone multiplier, and somewhere in there it spits out an equation. You can even put a function here where it does like plus and then it writes a function. If the function results in the correct type that matches whatever is stored in the player data, then it'll work. So after you're done defining all of the newly updated values, so it'll be like money, eliminations, which is usually just +1 at a time, whatever in your game you want to update, after all of the values have been updated, you then want to do make player profile data, and you have to specify that this is a constructor like that, and then in parentheses you want to do player data. And it's important that you do not put updated player data because it'll cause an error here. It says that some gobbledygook error. You want to be passing in the existing player data. So matter of fact, existing player data is this, and just like that. So this is just another example. If you are new to a topic, or if someone on your team is new to a topic and you don't really understand it, this is why naming variables, even though it's more code, it may be a little more ugly, that's okay. Because if someone who doesn't know anything about persistence were to see if existing player data is this and then updated player equals this, but then they won't get it confused at all. Because I mean, I don't even remember what code I wrote like a week ago. I'll go back and I'll look at code and I'm like, what the heck was I doing? Yeah, I really want to emphasize how important it is to write clean code over minimal code. The very last step that you need to do is update the player map. So we do if set player data, and in square brackets we do player reference or player ref, and then we also want to pass in the updated player data, just like that. All right, so once you've got that all written out, this is everything you need to know about persistence. Let's go back to the editor and set it all up. All right, so go ahead and drag this device into the viewport. We have the button, player spawners, and the version. The most important thing is you need to make sure that all of your player spawners are linked. If a player spawns in and for whatever reason it's not linked to this, it will not register any of the persistent data and it'll completely mess up your day. So just double, triple, quadruple check that all of your player spawners are linked. If you add new ones, you need to make sure that you link those as well. All teams, all classes, it does not matter. Player spawner must have it if they are spawning in for the first time. Go ahead and link both of them, just like that. We are then going to search for a button device. Boom, just like that. The interaction text is get rich with a couple exclamation points for some flair. And the interaction radius is going to be 0.5 just to make it a little bit easier to test. Go back to the verse device and link it up just like that. And you can leave the version at 0. Remember, this is only if you want to completely erase a specific version of everybody's data. Once you've taken care of all of that, go ahead and launch a session. Alright, so now that we're in game, we are going to click this get rich button and we get 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. And so you can see that it just is going up and up and up and up like you would expect from just a regular custom currency or a custom player, things like that. But the cool part is I click end game, and this is basically simulating a new session happening. We load back in, and if we walk up to the button again, we click it, it starts from 700, which is exactly where we left off when we left the first time. And it kind of just goes on, and that's all you really need to know about verse persistence. Other than that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. If this video helped you at all, remember to smash that like button, and other than that, peace.